It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. He is Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman, and unfortunately, it's time to relive the Giants game.
Yeah. You're jazzed. I'm jazzed. Everyone's jazzed.
This is one of those where it's like, thank God it's a short turnaround. Even if we expect potentially not the happiest of Commanders Thanksgivings against Dallas, it's just like we don't have to talk about this game anymore as of tomorrow. So that's exciting. We got that going for us, which is nice.
Yeah, so it's really weird talking about this game from the defensive side, from the defensive perspective, because they did a lot of really good things, and they probably played their most consistent three quarters that they've played the whole year. But we kind of get back to the things that have plagued this team throughout. It's the big plays. It's kind of the late losses. You know, we talk about the Seattle game and how that wasn't a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but they were really consistent on third down until they weren't consistent on third down. This team was excellent stopping the run, excellent at creating pressure until like they weren't doing that. And I think that's one of the things that's so frustrating about this game when you watch it. It's like, man, there's a lot. The defense probably played well enough to win the game. Obviously, they didn't win the game, so that's a weird kind of, circular thing there. But it was fun. It was fun for me to go watch the defensive film for a lot of it because I'm like, oh man, this is a great disguise here. This is a great blitz. This is a really nice pass rush. Look at John getting pressure here. There was a ton of stuff like that. Oh, Jamin like fitting on the fullback. Great job. And then all of a sudden you're like, there's 5 plays in the third quarter. And I think this is maybe the most telling statistic for me. So I chart green plays as good plays, red plays as bad plays. In the first 3 quarters, there are 5 what I would call red plays, right? There's 2 touchdowns, and then there's 2 touchdowns, and then there's 3 other plays where it's like a third down conversion or whatever. You get to the fourth quarter, there are 5 plays in that period that are bad. And you can think about them right now if you're a fan off the top of your head, right? And to me, that's the difference in the game. It was really good, and then it wasn't very good. So
yeah, that and the obvious turnovers, which we'll get to on the offensive side. But and there's a bit of the dam breaking, like we talked about on the instant reaction show, where it's like, well, if you just lose the spirit of it to a point, but also you're professionals. You got to finish, and that's what we talked about a lot this year. As we get a little more tactical and start this defensive breakdown, though, like the other thing we've talked about a lot this year is the big plays. And I think what's frustrating, Logan, in watching it back, and you and I just watched, 10, 15 plays or so together even. And one of the things that we're talking about is like the wheel route touchdown for Saquon Barkley, right? Every single team that the Commanders play runs some version of this play, this concept against them. And Jamin's done a solid job some weeks, and they've hit it on others. And on other weeks, they've gotten lucky, the Commanders have, where like there was the one, was it last week where the ball was underthrown and he winds up getting a hand in 2 weeks ago?
New England,
it was New England, where it probably should have been a touchdown, but Mac Jones did. And Jamin makes a nice play, batting it down on an underthrown ball. And so like when a player proves like, hey, this is not my strong suit, which in fairness to Jamin, like outside of Fred Warner, I don't know how many linebackers are like, I crushed this wheel route against a running back in space with very limited help. Like that's a tough ask. And especially the way the Giants set it up, they did a really good job of releasing Saquon to a place where he often runs like the choice route, kind of that angle, Texas route, whatever you want to call it, where it's kind of this V shape and you come back in. Saquon gives him a little juke to the inside and then sprints down the sideline on the wheel route. So it's a really, really tough ask for Jamin Davis or for any NFL linebacker. And so if it happens every week, at some point as a coach, you have to go, we need a different solution.
Right.
Like we have to figure out either a better coaching point, say like, hey man, no matter what, don't get beat here. Let's play with different leverage. Let's, make sure that we have help in situations where we think this comes up. And obviously like it's always easier once you've seen the play to be like, oh, well, if they had just done that, why didn't Cam Curl, cheat this? Forbes had the player that was going over the middle. Like Cam as a safety should have identified the threat better. But like it's easy when you know what's coming because it already happened and you're watching film. And that's good, as you talk about a lot. Like as an offense, it's exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to create those matchups and you know, if we're watching this from the Giants' perspective, we're giving Kafka and Dable a rousing round of applause for creating the thing that you want. But I guess, like, as a defensive coach, like, I got to take that one on the chin and be like, we keep putting this guy in this spot. It's no wonder the same results keep happening. Like, it's the definition of insanity thing of doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And to me, that's when it shifts from a player's responsibility to a coach's responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's a really good kind of perspective on it. And I think it's important to just kind of acknowledge, like, what the team's been doing. Like, in those 3-by-1 looks, they have a very high tendency to match the one receiver side, which is very common right now because you want to get 4 over 3. You know, you want to get 4 defenders over the 3 receiver side. So the way you do that is you say, we got to play man over here. And so if you're matching the outside receiver with the corner and you're basically playing man, then the hook player or the outside linebacker, the safety, whoever that is, usually has to play man on the back. And that's a very common thing in, like, this Vic Fangio era of defense because it allows you to play numbers. You're basically playing stats here, right? You're saying they're more likely to throw to the 3 receiver side than they are to the single receiver side. So we're okay being a little bit less coverage sound over here. And I just want to say, like, even though, you know, Jamin's had a hard time with it, Cam, when he was playing the kind of Buffalo nickel role last year, he had a wheel against Minnesota. Same exact play. You know, it's the same exact play because that's a tough coverage ask for that player in that situation. Because basically what you're relying on is that the rush gets home quick enough that the coverage can be good, right? So on that play, for example, the rush doesn't quite, you know, do what it's supposed to do. They've got, you know, and that's a tough down. But essentially, what I'm saying is that the defense seems to have a high frequency of running that coverage adjustment to 3-by-1 in the red zone. So if I'm an offensive coach, I say, can we get this matchup? Do we like the matchup? Right? Do we like Jamin Davis on our running back? And Jamin, to his credit, does a pretty good job matching backs. Like, you know, it's not perfect.
Even on this play, like, DeVito makes a hell of a throw.
Yeah, he does a pretty good job. He's a good athlete. He's long. He can run. And I think, like you said, he's in pretty good phase here. But if I'm Jack, right, I'm kind of saying, you know, I don't love their most explosive player on our linebacker. I want something different there. I want a different coverage solution. And to Jack's credit and to the team's credit, they seem to kind of adjust their coverage approach as they went. So instead of letting the back free release, they just let the defensive end reroute the back. And it really stymied a lot of the stuff they were trying to do to the back later. So that's a really good adjustment. And I don't know if they were supposed to do it early in the game. You know, there's a young football player in playing defensive end of that side. Maybe he forgets. Maybe he lets Jamin out to dry. I don't know. But there was a pretty high awareness of Saquon after this play. And I think I think they're probably aware of the matchup there. But also, like, the coverage is pretty good. To me, the rush doesn't get home. It's kind of a comedy of, not a comedy of errors, but it's the thing that's been kind of damaging for the team. It's a situation where you don't love the matchup defensively, you don't get the pressure you want, and maybe you don't get the execution you want from the defensive end. And those things are all speculative at this point, but those are things that I would just kind of call attention to.
Right. And I also would say this, like, it's a tough ask from Cam, but, like, when he wants to be paid like the best safety in the league, you know, that top end speed to get from the middle of the field truly to the sideline. And again, it's a great throw by DeVito.
It's a tough play.
Like, it is a really, like, it's a small window to get it as clean as it looks, right? Like, Saquon doesn't even really take a hit from Cam on this because the throw's so good. It's on the right trajectory with the right velocity, and it's pinpointed to the sideline. But could Cam erase all of that other stuff as a safety and, like, just make an Ed Reed play, right? Like, that's what separates the absolute best of the best from, like, hey, Cam did what he was supposed to, and there's just not quite enough time to get there, and a good throw beats you. And, like, that's a lot of what I think has happened this year, where there's, like you were saying, it's not a comedy of errors isn't really the right term, but it's like a tragic combination of not quite good enough.
Right. And I think that's the thing, like, with regards to Cam, like, I don't know if there's a safety playing now that can make that play. Obviously, you mentioned Ed Reed, Bob Sanders, Troy Polamalu, Earl Thomas. Like, those guys, like, that's why they're going to Hall of Fame playing safety, right? Because they can make that play. And I'm not sure I think Cam's a very good football player. I think he's a better football player near the line of scrimmage. But that's your point. Like, that's the differentiating factor between those guys. And again, like, if I'm coaching, I'm saying Cam, match the 3-by-1. Like, that's where we're probably thinking the ball is going to go. But the second the quarterback opens his shoulders and is pointing that direction, I got to make a beeline for that. And it's tough. So again, it's just not quite there from the safety spot. It's not quite there from Jamin. It's not quite there from the rush. And I don't think Jamin or Cam are bad on this play. I think the rush, if I'm the coach, I'm saying, hey man, like, we need more here, right? Like he can't sit there and make this throw. But what do I expect? I guess we traded 2 of our starting defensive linemen. F.A. Obata gets hurt, and we're starting 2 rookies, or they're in the rotation.
James hurt, so like you're down to your 4th, or guy who is at least 5th on the depth chart to start the season.
Yeah, and I think KJ Henry.
Casey,
KJ Henry did some really good stuff in this game, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But and Andre Jones did some good stuff, but they're young players, and they're not consistent with the rush. So, and they're getting better, and so like the first time with extensive minutes. So this isn't me bashing those guys, because I think they did some really good things that I'm excited to see the more of. But the rush wasn't there, and so you kind of put the coverage in a bad spot. And when Ron says like, oh, like last week or on the pregame show we were talking about, oh, the rush hasn't been consistent. Like, this is the type of stuff he's talking about. Like, when you watch the Giants versus the Commanders offense, when you watch the Cowboys versus the Giants offense from a couple weeks ago, like, when the rush is home, like, it covers up so many mistakes in the back end, and it just makes it so much easier to play coverage. And they just haven't been consistent in that department throughout the year. And that's been probably a point of frustration for me, and it's a point of frustration for the staff too. So
yeah, no, without a doubt. And again, it's just like, there's so many things where it consistently, though, like, there's just not, they haven't had answers all year. And so like the rail route stuff is one of them. And like, all this stuff could in some level be helped by the rush, obviously.
Right.
But can you be prepared for not suboptimal situations? They're by nature suboptimal, so you're not going to get them all the time. But another one that's killed them all year is kind of these mesh concepts. And in this case, it's like a mesh leak, if you will.
Yeah.
The touchdown.
So talk about what a leak is, because I don't think a lot of people know what that is.
So a leak route is basically you're going to come across the formation and then leak. I'm not using the word in the definition. That's
it's like you're
going to get vertical up the sideline. So
it's usually off of play action, right? Heavy play action. You run a sell run to the left, right? So when you sell a run to the left, usually the defense thinks you're rolling back to the to your right, away from the action, right, to kind of get to the perimeter. And so what you do is you take a receiver. It used to be a tight end. I used to run this play all the time, and you kind of hide. And then you work your way up the sideline for like a seam throw, right? And so a couple of years ago, everyone said, why do we have our 3rd string tight end doing that when we have like Cooper Kupp or someone to do that? So they have Darius Slayton do that, much faster guy. And so the run action kind of clears the linebackers out. It forces a specific response from the backside corner, like, because you're usually running a crossing route, so they'll kind of match that because they think you're rolling away. And then
so in this case, they play action to the right. And then Slayton comes from the offensive right back across the formation, and then again leaks up the left sideline to the offensive left.
And I think they play action to the left. It's play action left.
Play action left. Yeah. And Slayton comes from the right and then leaks up the left sideline. And you think that DeVito, because he's play actioning left, is going to boot right.
Correct.
And then instead he stops and throws the ball kind of back across, which is why it's a leak, like it's hidden. On that backside. The first time I remember seeing this play run or a version of this was when Jordan and Vernon were here as tight ends. And they had Vernon run it, which is like, oh yeah, when your backup right tight end runs a 4-4, like that's the best of both worlds. You think he's just like coming across as a sneaky blocker, and then he takes off up the sideline. And they hit Vernon for a touchdown for it back in like 2016 or whatever. Anyway, this one's more comedy of errors to me. But the reason I call it like a mesh leak and kind of lump it in is because it's routes crossing, and that has been a huge problem. The ability to properly stick with a guy or pass it off or understand how you're passing it off, create lanes to let people run where they need to run. And basically what happens on this play is Kendall Fuller looks like he's got Slayton in man-to-man, and you always want to play on different levels as a corner. Or as DBs, so that you have space to run, so that you don't run into each other. And as offensive players, if you're well coached, which the Giants are, I almost said the Bills, because Isaiah Hodgins, the guy who becomes the pick here, was with Brian Daboll in Buffalo, and has certainly been running this with Daboll for years. It was like, okay, well, if my job is to kind of be the pick guy, I'm going to run directly at the defender and make him make a decision. I'm not going to let him get around me easily.
Right.
And what happens on this one is Percy Butler and Danny Johnson lock on to Hodgins, and they become this giant 3-man blob of a pick that Kendall starts to go over, realizes I got to go even wider, and by the time he bubbles over the top, he's got no chance at Slayton. So we watched this, 4, 5, 6 times to try to figure out what could have happened here. The end result is, like, obviously it's a touchdown, and they did not play it well, whatever it was. Whether it was supposed to be passed off, whether it's supposed to be, hey, give Kendall space to run through, whether, Danny Johnson should have fallen off, whether, I don't even know, I can't even remember all the other options at this point.
But those were the main ones, right?
Yeah, but it's it just doesn't seem like they're on the same page, or that it's detailed up to the level that the Giants offense is, where Hodgins is like, watch what I can do.
Right.
I'm going to be a giant mess, and Slayton's wide open.
Yeah, and I think that's like kind of the main point is like this kind of keeps popping up, like the rail in the red zone keeps popping up, right? These mesh passing off pops up quite a bit. And obviously when you're playing like match coverages and when you're playing true man, like on a crossing route, I want to be able to pass it off. So I think, if this was a keeper, like the way they play keeper in certain coverages. So what I mean keeper, it's like instead of throwing the leak, like that front side receiver. So you're play actioning to the left, that receiver to the left is going to run like a 10-yard cross. And so in that look, that safety usually cuts the cross and the corner usually drops out. Now, that's coverage dependent. If they're playing true man, you would just stick to your guy and the safety is going to stay in the post. But they very rarely play true man. It's usually got some match element, which is why we're like, it looks like Percy's supposed to cut that and he's supposed to fall off.
Yeah,
and
Danny should have fallen off and been underneath that route.
Yeah, been right in the leak window. And so, but again, like because they run so many different coverages, so many variations of similar coverages, it's hard to know exactly what they were supposed to do on that play. But those are the details that keep popping up. On the 4th and 2, for example, which we talked about, they run actual mesh and they just drop the tight end in coverage.
Right. This is the one where they get lucky because this is one where the rush covers for a huge coverage mistake. Right. If Forbes gets hurt on the play, that one. Yeah. They just completely botch the coverage. Dude is wide open. It's almost like people got distracted by Forbes going down, and then also the pass rush helped on that one quite a bit.
Well, even that one I think is really interesting because they start in a bunch, and again, bunches have been problematic for us, right?
Yep.
Saquon runs essentially a wheel, which Jamin matches, but Cam Curl also matches, and so then someone is supposed to cover the tight end, and he just sits over the ball at 10 yards, and there's no one in the shot. Like you could pause the frame, and it's like the tight end and nobody else.
Yeah, he's so open, it's ridiculous.
And so thank God that Mayo, and the rush is there and they get a sack and all that kind of stuff. Or he throws it away or whatever it does. But I think those are the types of things that they pop up so consistently. You're just like, there has to be a better way. When you talk to Fred, for example, and he played defense, 15 years ago. So things have changed quite a bit. But, even when I was playing, like defenses and defensive backs, when you're in a bunch, it's like you couldn't get those guys to shut up. They were talking so much. And here it feels like everybody's less communicative. And I'd just be curious to talk to somebody in the building and be like, how are we communicating this? Like, what's our rule for this? And I guess there's times where you see that and you're like, there doesn't seem to be a consistent like modus operandi for when we're in a bunch, like who's doing what. And like, for example, we'd play teams and they did the same thing to bunches all the time, which Kyle was able to exploit or Sean was able to exploit or whoever. But I think that's something that it just pops up so regularly. There's something dysfunctional about the process regarding these crossing concepts and tight bunches and tight formations.
Yeah, no, it's and by the way, not forget what Fred said. Sorry, Smoot. I wanted to forget. How could we ever forget Fred Smoot? He won't let us. Benjamin St-Juste after the game was like, some of this stuff, like our defense is so complicated that we just struggle with it. And I think it would be easier if we played simpler coverages. Like, talk about leaks. There's starting to be some displeasure expressed in the press with how some of this stuff is because they can't fix it. And like, it seems like the fix sometimes has been to give them more potential solutions as opposed to simplifying and saying like, this might not be create the most optimal solution all the time, but at least everyone will know what they're doing. And that would be more optimal than whatever has happened.
Yeah. And I think, and it's funny because obviously people know how to get these concepts communicated because everyone runs some form of man match in the NFL. But they have different tools or different solutions or whatever. So this is something that, again, like it's interesting to hear St. Juice say that. St. Juice handled it well because he was like, obviously we've seen this work before and we've seen this executed at a high level and how it elevates our defense. I thought that was very diplomatic in terms of his response, but I do think it shows a certain element of frustration that is probably understandable at this point. So,
and it goes back, frankly, to something we've been talking about as a question since the offseason, which is like, how do these coaches coach? Like, how are they as teachers, right? It's not necessarily about play calling, although, some of this is, but it's really more about like, do you have the ability as a staff to make sure that you teach it at such a level of understanding by the players that they don't mess it up, that they really understand why they're doing everything, and thus they make the proper adjustments and they all make the same one and they're all on the same page because it makes sense to them and it doesn't feel like a giant guessing game. And thus you have the miscommunication and the kind of fundamental mistakes where, like, if you're just saying, hey, play outside leverage for the sake of playing outside leverage, it's not going to stick as well as saying, oh, hey, you're playing outside leverage because we need this guy to do that, and it creates this here. And there's kind of not this like global level of understanding on this defense very clearly based off the results.
Yep, absolutely. And it'd be, these are things that are challenging to correct, but I think they can be corrected if, communicated effectively. It's just kind of to your point, is there a way to get that done? So, yeah.
All right. Anything else on the defensive side? Obviously we said we'd talk a little bit about the young guys rushing. Anything else that was worth mentioning?
Yeah, I think a lot of people had good games. I think KJ Henry did some really good things. I think
you got 9 sacks and you gave up 0 rush yards through 3 quarters. Like, there's Mayo clearly still a lot of good there.
Mayo did a good job. I thought Big Phil early had a good game. I thought Ridgeway had a good game. I think Casey Tuhill flashes at times. Jamin does some stuff in the run game that's getting to be kind of that next level run defender, which is great to see. I thought Forbes did some good stuff. I feel like
Forbes had a really good one.
It's just, again, he had a couple in the 2-minute drive right before half where, there's crossing routes. He doesn't get it quite covered up, but he has 2 beautiful PBUs. Great job by him. Like, great to see that one in the low red for a touchdown. Yeah. Like great job. And that's a really tough coverage ask. Hard play action. Everyone steps up.
He's so smooth on that play. Like, you see why he has so many interceptions. And, to me, the thing that stands out for 13 is he's starting to adjust to the speed of it all.
I think so too.
And that's really nice to see.
And I think the other one that I thought was maybe better was there was a pylon route. So like a high corner going away from the tunnel. And he kind of just easily undercuts it, gets his hand on the ball, no PI, no nothing, just great footwork, great position. And you see that, why he's a first-round pick, obviously. And then I think a guy that 2 weeks in a row, man, has just been playing with his hair on fire is Percy Butler. Like, he is doing a lot of really good stuff. He's tackling much better. He had some tough, coverage asks. He made some nice tackles on screens. And if he can figure it out, that's going to be really beneficial for this defense. I think he was the highest graded player again this week for the defense. Yeah. And there, there's some stuff there to point out because PFF doesn't know this, but is he supposed to, on the leak, is he supposed to pass that off or whatever? And we don't know, but in terms of tackles and fit and runs, I thought he did a really nice job. So I think the point is they did some really good stuff defensively. It's just, they had a letdown. I think another one we got to call attention to is we talked about the rail. We talked about the leak. The other one that is really frustrating is the toss crack run to Saquon Barkley. That's an issue they've had.
The one that broke the dam.
Yeah, they've had an issue with that run for most of the year. And again, they did a good job early stopping it against Seattle, for example. They did a good job stopping it, so they have the ability to do it. But this one, Andre Jones is in, Quan Martin's in, and Quan's playing better ball too. So again, 2 guys that are playing well. On this play, I think their youth and their lack of awareness leads to a big opportunity here. And guys could have saved it for him, but there's stuff like that. And I think overall, like I said, there's over the course of 51 plays, there's 10 bad ones, which is very unusual for this group. It's not been that. And so I think it's an interesting game to talk about because there really are just a handful of plays that you want back from an execution standpoint. So.
Yeah. Unfortunately, those big ones, it's not, even if you can, again, make it the 15, 20-yard big one versus the touchdown big one, that's the difference in a game sometimes. And they couldn't do that. And that, unfortunately, is a big reason why they lost the game.
100%.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. Craig Hoffman here, Logan Paulson there. We are off this week from the Take Command pregame show, so we're not at Tap Sports Bar, but we'll be back there ahead of the Miami game at MGM National Harbor. But if you want to listen on the radios, you're driving to wherever you're going to watch the game on Thanksgiving, make sure you check out our guy Denton Day, who's holding down the fort. So there will be a Take Command pregame show. It'll just be on the radio, no YouTube stream. I'm going to try to hop on with Denton, so looking forward to that. But our guy Denton Day is doing a great job always, and we're happy to have him fill in for us on Thanksgiving Day. And so make sure that you check him out there. All right, the offense. I like watching this game back was so frustrating because they couldn't get anything going, in part because they couldn't get started, right? They have 2 turnovers on their first 2 possessions. And then kind of mid-second quarter, they start to find a little bit of a vibe. And then they get into the third and they keep it going. They're running the football really well. And then Chris Rodriguez fumbles, and it just feels like the air totally comes out of the balloon. And by the way, that's right when the dam breaks for the defense, too. Like the next play from scrimmage, I think, is the toss crack to Saquon, if I'm remembering correctly, timing-wise, in that third quarter. Like it's end of the third quarter when he does, and it just feels like, okay, like this was cute, Giants. You guys are trying to be competitive, and you're trying to do the thing where you beat the Commanders because you always beat the Commanders,
right? But
you're not a good football team, and it's time to take the game back. And then he fumbles, and then they don't take the game back. And it really is like there's a lot to talk about, but you can't do any of the talking about the process without the talking about the fact that it's impossible to win with 6 turnovers.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, we're going to give you some deeper analysis, but like that's the main point. Like 80% of this game is the fact they turn the football over so much. Like you can't execute good ball. And I think we talked about this on the post-game reaction show, and going back and watching it, I feel like they're like effort fumbles. And what I mean by that, it's like they're trying too hard to like break another tackle. Like the one on Logan, like I don't know how you hold on that ball. Like someone was talking to me about it, like, oh, he's got to hold on. It's like basically like this has happened to me. So speaking from experience, if you take that shoulder pad or that helmet right on the ball, it's like damn near impossible to hold on to it. So like, and I don't think he's got hands on, like it's tight.
Yeah, he's got like 2 hands on the ball. He's fallen down, and it's just a direct hit to the right part of the ball.
And I hate to like I don't care how strong you are, like unless you're down, like that ball is coming out. Like I had one when we were playing Kansas City. It was raining, high and tight. Like kind of put my shoulder on a guy, and I didn't see this other defender coming, and he put his helmet like literally on the ball. And I remember looking down and watching the ball squirt across my body towards the sideline. And I was just like, I even had 2 hands on it. It just squirted right through both my hands. So again, like that's tough. Even the Chris Rodriguez,
or bicep curls, bro. Come on.
Yeah, I need to do something. Yeah, even the one with Chris Rodriguez, like he's running hard. Like I thought he had a great game. Like obviously excluding the fumble, but like his vision, his power, his contact balance, it's like, man, like that's awesome. As a pure runner, like he's probably the best on the team. But then he's running hard. He's fighting for the extra yard. Ball comes out. B. Rob's fumble late. Like he's trying his face off. Ball comes out. So, and Pringle, we're going to talk about him for a second. He's got a good return going, fighting for extra yards, ball comes out. So I think it's just a little bit serendipity, a little bit of stressing about trying to make a play, and you probably don't have to. Just like the one that Chris Rodriguez is so interesting because it's like literally a 7-yard run, and he's fighting for an 8th yard, and the ball comes out. It's like that's a good play.
It is, and I think it's it's just knowing when to say when, and like we've had enough, and like let me get down safely and live to fight another down. But that's not the nature of football. It's really easy to sit here in a cushy, studio or the comfort of our homes and be like, yeah, man, just take the 7 yards and get down. And, as a coach, like that's probably what we'd be saying is like, hey, you gotta You got to just know when you're exposed, like, hey, if I'm in this position, if I'm Logan Thomas, like, I'm exposed, that hit is available. And you know, because you've already made contact, that there's guys rallying to the ball to punch it out at that point, especially against the Giants. Like, that's what they do. They're coached on that stuff very, very well. This is something they do week in and week out. So, like, you got to know, hey, if you take contact and you're not, like, fight for yards, but, like, also, like, hug the hell out of the ball and try to get down, because you're going to have guys coming in and punching at it. And then you get in the emotions of the game and you're trying to fight your face off. And that's the nature of it. So it's a level of discipline, but that's so much easier said than done. Like, that is the solution, right? We can acknowledge that while also going, like, God, that's so hard on a game day to execute.
It's true. And I think one of the fumbles, the fumble that taught me this was against the Giants in 2014. I caught like a 5-yard out. And, like, I was a big guy and DBs didn't like tackling me. So I was up and I was kind of rumbling through some contact, and the corner, so it was the safety and the linebacker, were on my legs, and he came up and I could feel him, like, attacking the fingers of my hand. And I was like, oh no, like, this ball's about to come out. And I could not get to the ground quick enough. You know what I'm saying? Like, because he was just literally, like, peeling the fingers off the ball. And I just think it just taught me after that. I was like, the most important thing is the ball. And sometimes you need to play like that, just to remember, like, hey, like, as much as I want to be big and bad and you know, dent face masks and knock people on the ground when I got the ball in my hands, like, that's the thing that is the most important about this game. And sometimes it takes one of these to remind you of that. So obviously that's the main point. I think the secondary point here is something that we talked about where we were watching clips. Is that I think the Giants deserve a ton of credit. Like, when you look at the concepts that EB was running and this offense was running, I thought the quick game was there for the most part. I thought there was some stuff early where the Giants did some creative stuff and took some stuff away, but on the whole, the quick game was there. I think it was like the mid-level shot and the deep shot that the Giants did such a good job of taking away from a coverage standpoint. And one of the reasons they did a good job of that is because their rush was really dialed in. Like, Dexter Lawrence was an absolute unit. Like, he just did such a fantastic job of just creating consistent pressure, being disruptive in the run game. The line stunts they ran, like the way they ran their line stunts, I thought, especially on third down, just exploited pressure looks, exploited protection looks, excuse me. Like, we just saw the one that led to Dexter Lawrence sack, like, slides going left. It's a 5-man pro, man side to the right, and they run a stunt in a way that makes it hard for the guard and center to be right, and you end up getting a sack. And they did that, you know, with 4 rushers. And I thought they just did a really good job of consistently creating pressure. And it wasn't just Dexter Lawrence, obviously Kayvon Thibodeau. And everyone says, oh, Leno has a hard time with Kayvon Thibodeau. But I thought, in addition to Kayvon Thibodeau having some good rushes, there was also, they moved him around the front quite a bit. They stunted him quite a bit. And that was it was masterfully done. It was a well-coached defensive line, and the secondary was well coached in terms of how they were matching concepts, and it made it very challenging for the offense outside of the turnovers to be successful.
There's a couple questions I guess I have. So it feels like I would make them kind of cohesive, right? It feels like EB runs the offense, and there's not, I don't want to say a care, but there's not like an emphasis on personnel, right? Whether his own or the other team. Right. So if I'm designing a protection plan, I remember talking to coaches about this, like, back in the day when I was on the beat, and, you know, you're about to face the Rams, and it's like, hey, if we lose, we lose, but we're not letting Donald beat us. Like, we have to have a protection plan for 99. We are not going to let the thing that they want to do make it the path of least resistance to beat us. By the same token, on the offensive, like, side of personnel, it doesn't seem like there's a crazy emphasis in getting the ball to the playmakers, Terry, Jahan, et cetera, where, like, Logan Thomas, again, has a ton of targets, and Logan's a good player, but he's not as explosive as Jahan and Terry. And this offense hasn't been designed for wide receivers in a while in Kansas City because Travis Kelce was their best player, and it worked out that way. You go back to, and then, like, the other thing too is, you know, I was talking about this with someone in the locker room after the game, like, when this offense was cooking in Kansas City with Tyreek, like, Tyreek, you can't count as a regular wide receiver.
Correct.
Because he breaks coverage with speed in a way that literally no one else. Like, Jahan and Terry run 4.3s, and Tyreek smokes them.
Right.
Like, they're 95 on Madden speed. He's 114.
Right.
And so, like, you watch him run through cover 2, and you're like, okay, well, like, the routes that are deep routes that, quote-unquote, should work because they used to work with Tyreek Hill aren't going to work with these guys because they're regular NFL fast. And so I just wonder, like, when you watch the tape of a game like this, is it too easy to let – and, look, Dexter Lawrence is great. You know, his ability to overcome stuff is why he's him.
Right.
But – is it too easy for Dexter Lawrence to get the things that he wants and for Wink to get the things he wants with Dexter Lawrence? And could that be avoided with some quick, easy stuff to playmakers where you don't have to win with the pen and you can win with Jahan Dotson juking someone in space?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think, there was some stuff like that in this game. There was a screen early to Terry. There was a couple slants to Terry. Terry's.
It seems like in some big situations they did go to Terry, and I'm glad you brought that up because that is the one situation where it's like, oh, it's third down, we got to have it. Like, let's get Terry isolated on a slant, and he'll win. And
they did a great, and like, so when I say quick game, like, that's all quick game stuff, that they did a good job of. They ran a screen, just like a now screen to Diami, and I thought Diami did a great job getting 8 yards on that. So there was stuff like that in the game, like a plan for the pressure. I think the thing that was surprising to me, and you were talking about protection plan, is I think one of the things that I, going into the game, I was like, well, Wink's going to bring a lot of pressure, and he brought a fair amount. And when we say pressure, he's bringing like 5-man pressures. He's not bringing his exotic blitzes the way that you kind of thought he would, right? He really had a good 5-man rush plan, 5- and 4-man rush plan.
Yeah, a lot of simulated pressure.
Correct, which is something that I was not expecting. So when it comes to planning for Dexter Lawrence, I think it's like a secondary concern to Wink. And I think in this case, like, you had a plan for Wink's protection issues that he presents, but that does compromise your ability to develop a good, cohesive, comprehensive plan against Dexter Lawrence. And I do think that they did some stuff, like they sent the slide to him, they left chippers in, but ultimately, like, the thing about a nose guard, unlike a 3 technique, is you can't slide the pro to a nose necessarily. And I think that's one of the things, like, on that protection we were just describing, where you get the sack by Dexter Lawrence, like, he's playing a true nose, and they have everyone's covered up. They have 5 kind of potential rushers at the line of scrimmage. It's a 5-man pro, right? So Dexter Lawrence starts at the nose and he stunts, and he basically picks Chris Paul while he's pass protecting number 55, who is now looping to the opposite A gap. And so because Dexter Lawrence is so good, you have 2 guys on him right there, right? But because of the protection rules and because of how the slide works, he doesn't know, Larson doesn't know if Cosme's able to help him in the slide or not, because he's a nose guard. If it's a 3 technique, you have a natural double team there right now, right, with the center and the guard. But because of how they've spaced the front here, you can't do that. And I think that's one of the advantages, like, you hear guys around, commenting on, this is like really nerdy football stuff, but the advantages of having a pass rushing nose are really dramatic, because they allow you to find some of these matchups that are really hard for protections to account for. And that's what you saw in this game a little bit. And obviously Dexter Lawrence is going to win one-on-ones, but I do think there is an element of scheme elevating his production in this game. And like, when you go back and watch the clips, like, I don't want to say every play, but it feels like every play, whether it's a run or whether it's a pass, he is getting penetration, he's being disruptive. And I think for some of the reasons we just described.
Yeah, he's just really freaking good. As for Sam's day, what do we see when we go back and watch? I mean, we watched a couple of the picks, and it's like, those are good decisions and bad throws. And obviously the one late, same kind of thing. If he's truly trying to throw it out of bounds, like, that's the correct thing, and he just horrendously underthrows it. The one to Jahan, like, their protection breaks down, not necessarily because anybody in particular loses, but again, like, a good pressure from Wink, take advantage of what the Commanders are trying to do. All of a sudden, it's a jailbreak. Sam's running out. He sees Jahan looping open, tries to throw it, doesn't get enough on it. Pick. He overthrows the one to Diami, but it's a good decision. If he throws it out in the grass, Diami probably is able to run underneath it for a big play. So the 3 picks, like, actually are, to me, not the worst of things. Although the last one, obviously, results-wise, is about as bad as you can get.
Right.
But process-wise, not bad. But he just also never really gets going. There's nothing major that happens in the game outside of those.
I think that's the thing that I would just kind of look at, with him is, the first pick, I think that's the right decision, bad ball. The pick to Jahan, I think he's coming open. I think he probably makes that throw last week, but misses it kind of badly inside, whatever the reason. But I think outside of that, even, I just don't think he got settled in. I think whether it was the pressure, and there was a fair amount of consistent, relatively quick pressure that kind of unsettled him. Like, we watched the touchdown, or not the touchdown, the red zone sequence, the one where he throws the ball to Logan Thomas. And I think that kind of encapsulates his day. I think, Logan Thomas is coming open, but Sam's a little accelerated. The back's open in the flat. Curtis is coming open across the middle. And if you can just let that breathe and marinate for a second, I think you probably feel that. If you get to the top of your drop, take your hitch like you're supposed to, you're like, oh, I can get the ball to the back, or I can get the ball to Curtis.
Right. Like, oh, that window to Logan's real tight. That's probably because that guy's not supposed to be there. Oh, look, Curtis is wide open.
Right. And I say, oh, well, and I'm sure fans are listening, be like, well, why doesn't he do that? And Dexter Lawrence has a pressure on that play. And I really felt like that was something that just changed the landscape of this game in a way that, we talked about how that was going to be an important matchup in the pregame, but it had such an outsized impact, because there's a play later in the game where it's not a play action, but it's kind of like a shot look, right? Where Jahan is running like an out, up, back to a comeback, and Dexter gets a quick pressure. And so Sam's got to vacate. He ends up scrambling for a big play, 20-yard gain, but Jahan is wide open in the middle of the field. And talk about a play that would have changed the landscape of the game. Like, that would have changed the landscape of the game. It would have been a completion. Jahan, there's nobody around him. He's one-on-one with the safety. Who knows what happens, right?
Right.
So I think there's just so many plays like that. And then I think in addition to that, first off, I thought, EB did a great job designing like Logan Thomas's first catch. I wanted to call attention to that. It's out of 13. It's like a sail route. Beautiful. He came back to that play a couple times, and I thought the Giants did a really good job of matching it and saying, we understand what you're trying to do and how you're trying to attack us. And so there's not a lot of air to throw those footballs. And so how the Giants adjusted in terms of attacking and matching concepts, coupled with the pass rush, I think just made it very hard for Sam to get settled in. And one of the things, I was listening to some analysts that PFF did, or analysis that PFF did on this game, and Sam had 0 big-time throws in this game, which is
crazy for him.
Yeah, which is very.
He leads the league in them.
Yeah, he leads the league, and in terms of percentage rate, he's like 10th or 9th. He's got a very high percentage in addition to having a lot of volume. And I think when you look back at his best performances, there's always a couple of just like wow plays. You look at the New England game, there's probably 4 or 5. Look at Seattle, there's probably 4 or 5. And this game, there was 0. And I think that's the thing that is the most different about this game. I thought he did fine with the quick game. Thought he did fine with the keepers. But at that mid-level to deep, where he's been kind of exceptional, and you see kind of the reason people are talking about him in this light as being the guy, that magic wasn't there today. And I think that's probably the biggest difference in the performance.
It's something that if he wants to be really good in this league, he's going to have to adapt to, because, you've seen it with Mahomes. The offense, when they had Tyreek, was able to hit a lot of that deep stuff. And what happened is also the nature of this offense and the ability for them to create misdirection and kind of leak guys out and have big plays. Teams just started saying, we're not doing that. Like, we're not letting you beat us deep. And Mahomes became so absurdly efficient underneath that they've still been Super Bowl caliber. And obviously, this year has been a little bit different. Their receivers are struggling and they can't seem to catch anything. And then the 1 or 2 shots a game, like Valdez-Scantling drops it last night. And when those opportunities come, you have to hit them. But like the reason Mahomes is still the MVP and is still so good is because he just became ruthless underneath. Yeah. Very Brady-esque in the way that Tom used to dominate. And so, Sam is now 12, 13 starts into his career. It's okay for a young guy to have an off day. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden he's not the guy that his trajectory is really any different than it was. It's just kind of, more teams are going to do this. Like, you have to, one, be able to take those opportunities when they come, stay patient, still look for them, trust go through the proper process and hit them when they're there, but also just understand that means there's stuff open underneath, and the timing of that stuff has to be better so that you can just, death by 1,000 paper cuts it. But I would also say, in respect to this game, it's impossible to sustain long drives when you fumble. So, so much for that plan.
Yeah, and also I think, one of the reasons that they ran the ball so well is they were running them into pretty advantageous looks here, I thought. Because there were some kind of softer coverage structures. There wasn't a lot of like single high. It's a lot of two shell looks, guys back off the ball, guys deep, and then they're kind of relying on their front six to kind of make a bunch of plays, and they couldn't in a lot of instances. And I think that's one of the reasons why, to EB's credit, that he leaned into that. But I think, like we've talked about this before, and you've talked about, rushing frequency and what's the tipping point for the perfect EPA for the offense. And I think in this game, like, the fact they were running the ball so well was because of what Wink was trying to do. Because I think, when you look at the scouting report for this team, you've said this for probably 4 weeks now on the pregame show. If you were a defensive coordinator, you would play like the softest cover 2 quarters, cover 6, down in and down out, and be like, hey, man, you are going to run the football.
Right.
I dare you. And in this game, they did it. And I think the thing that is frustrating about it is that feels like the right approach, because you can get them out of that stuff. Then you can get back to some of those shot plays like we were talking about and describing, and Sam makes it easier for Sam. But you turn the ball over so much, you can't
never get back to the
going,
shots.
And like, so I think that's to me, that feels like what's going on with this team in this game. It'll be interesting to see if Dallas abides by the same principle, because they, while not as dramatic in terms of pressure rate as Wink Martindale, they rely on their front four, and Micah Parsons created a ton of pressure. Like, do they say, hey man, we're going to kind of adopt a similar approach here and force you to run the ball more than you want to run it? So
yeah, we trust that you'll throw a pick 6 to Deron Bland because everyone else seems to. Like, we'll trust you to make the mistakes, and that's the challenge of it, right? And that's why there is that tipping point, because long drives are hard to sustain, and you have to at some point in there turn that soft coverage back around. They start to cheat up a little bit, and you hit the big one, and they never got to that in this game. Last thing real quick I want to touch on, it does feel like EB is a bit predictable, and even when they like try to subvert expectations, if you will, it almost feels like, oh, we're in 13 personnel. Don't expect a pass from us. And like the deep shot to Diami is out of 13. Right. There's a couple of other times in this game where they bring in the big personnel, and it's like, we're going to subvert expectations, except for when you break the tendency so often, you're not actually breaking the tendency. You're doing your tendency. That's how tendencies work. And I'm just curious if you feel that when you're going back and watching the tape, because we talked about like how well the Giants did subverting expectation, and kind of the contrast I think is interesting. Right. So I just feel like, maybe it's because we watch the team every week, but like that's what scouts do. So if I can see it, professional scouts and advanced scouts can see it, but it just feels like when they used to bring in Alex Arma, although they were better about it with him, they bring in Alex Arma, like, I'm prepared for play action. They bring in 13 personnel in this game. I'm prepared for play action, as opposed to like, oh, we gotta stop the run. Oh no, they got us. Like they don't get that reaction from a defense because it feels very predictable.
Yeah, I think there's like the overarching tendency of what EB wants to do, which we've talked about pretty extensively, and I think the thing, like, for example, they are in 12 personnel, they motion Bates to the backfield as a fullback, and it's like, they're probably going to run a play action here, and they run a play action, right? And, I understand you like the concept, you're trying to take advantage of a thing you like, a matchup you like, and they end up checking the ball down to Bates, ends up being an 8-yard gain. So there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there are plays that EB likes. I think there are concepts that EB likes. I think they tend to skew toward those concepts. Like, in the red zone, they're going to run, I'll go special, and they're going to try and get the back up the seam. And that works, but if you run it all the time, people are going to be ready for it, right?
Right. And it's a lot of similar down and distance stuff too, where it's like, come on, like we know based off that you're going to do this.
Right. And I think most coordinators have strong tendencies. And I think, we talk about Kyle a lot. Like, Kyle has plays that he loves, and he's going to get those plays called a couple of times. I think the thing about Kyle is that when you watch it, and I've seen guys, like Schwartz does breakdowns of the runs and all this stuff. And he's like, look at this run. And I've been in the system, so I'm like, oh, like that's just Zorro, but he's doing it out of 10 personnel with the receiver, and they're motioning, and it's the same run, it's the same rules for everybody, but it's disguised in his presentation, or like this play action out of this shift and this little bump motion, and it's the same concepts. It just looks different. And I think there are times where it looks too similar. If I was if EB asked me, like there's times where I feel like it kind of falls in like, oh yeah, like you liked at a 3x1, you like to run sail. Like here you go. And I think that's one of the things about the first completion or the second completion of Logan Thomas down in the low red that leads to the field goal is it's out of 13. They motion to it, and it feels different, and all of a sudden it's sail and it's wide open. And you're like, oh, that's just a beautiful play design. So he's got that in there, you know what I mean? But also I think like I'm always of the mindset, because of the guys that I played for, that you can do that more. You know what I'm saying? Like because of Kyle, because of Sean, I'm always like, do that all the time. And that's an unrealistic expectation, but I think you can do it more. But I think to counter my own argument, I think he's been very successful with what he's done, kind of getting, because there is a school of thought saying that we are just going to run these concepts and know these concepts better than you can cover them. And I think there's a lot of value there. But in this game, obviously that didn't play out the way and a big part of it, we're going to say this a million times, is because you turned the football over 6 times. And
it's hard to get to the second level stuff when you can never get past the first level because you fumble.
Right. And I think the other thing is like this is just like a different way of saying what you just said, is like there is you want to layer stuff, right? You want to kind of get to the play action pass, but in the back of the defense's mind, when you're down and you're trying to score points, they're going to throw the ball. Like even it's so funny. Even like when I'm the OC at the high school, whatever, you throw an interception, right? And you're just like, it's 7-0. Nothing about the game has changed, but every coach comes up to you like, I like these 4 passes. and because you feel this urgency and this rush, and defenses know that too. And you could see that they were like, they're going to throw to get back in this game because there's an urgency. And that's why I thought the drive, where ultimately Chris Rodriguez fumbles was so brilliant. And the drive that they got the field goal on was so brilliant because they ran the ball a ton. They were very patient. And then after that, that's when you felt that urgency come, because the Giants were kind of moving the ball a little bit offensively, and it just changes the dynamic instantly. So,
yeah, I think the other element of that is like managing the quarterback. He is still young and still is inexperienced. And if you watch Chiefs Eagles last night, especially in the first half, obviously the Chiefs offense didn't do squadoosh in the second, but in the first half, like you watch all the orbit motions, you watch them, zing Kadarius Toney here and throw this smoke screen, where Mahomes has the option at the line to abort the run there, and like Mahomes on every single play is barking something different, and there's just a command and kind of a layering of the offense that is next level, because he's been in that system with Andy for a long time. And if you were to go back and watch like first year Mahomes, I'm curious how much of that you would see. And so, Sam, over the course of time, whether it's with EB or whoever is here next, like hopefully that's something he can develop. But if I was EB, like last time we kind of ran into this rut, I put more on him and things got better. So that's also another thing to consider if I'm Eric over these, maybe not Thursday, but like over the mini buy and then over the big buy. Like, can we find things to implement that can help Sam have a few more answers and disguise things a little more, et cetera, et cetera. All right, that's our show. We'll be back tomorrow with a quick preview of the Cowboys game, and then we'll instant reaction it, not quite instantly. We'll do that Friday morning after enjoying our Thanksgiving. So hope everyone has a great week. Safe travels if you are traveling to wherever you are going, and we will see you tomorrow here on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.